Okay, good morning, everybody. Welcome to CrimCon Day 2. We've got a full slate of presentations here. We will be going in the order of the program, and we will give each paper 10 minutes to speak. I will jump in with about a minute left to just remind people of the time. If you have any questions for any of our panelists, please feel free to post them in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. If you want to do this while they're speaking, that's totally fine. And we will address all the questions at the end. So our fourth panelist is just logging in now. So I'm going to, oh, and I don't want to forget this either. Stream 2 is sponsored today by Southern Illinois University Press. So please check out their selection of books. We will start with you, Susan, situational risk factors for inmate-on-staff assault. The floor is yours whenever you're ready.
All right. So I'm Susan McNeeley. I'm with the Minnesota Department of Corrections. And this study is about assaults against prison staff, which is a major safety concern in correctional facilities. So this study focuses on how situational characteristics can contribute to assault with the goal of identifying ways to prevent them. Prior research had identified some characteristics that are common in staff assaults, but they didn't compare assaults to non-assaults to determine which risk factors actually make assault more likely. So this study compares staff assaults over a 1.5-year period to a random sample of non-assaults that occurred during the same time. So the study examines incidents from Oak Park Heights, which is an all-male maximum security prison in Minnesota. For another study, we had already collected a random sample of 500 incidents at this facility between October 2016 and March 2018. So I realized that this was a good chance to compare assaults to non-assaults. So first I used data from our discipline process to find all the staff assaults or the attempted staff assaults during that time period. There were 85 charges for attempted or completed staff assaults during that time. So 85 incidents were randomly selected from the sample of 500 that we had for another study. However, some of the assaults were the same assaults committed by multiple individuals. So there ended up being only 68 staff assault incidents, which were compared to the 85 incidents with no assault. The study looked at 2 dependent variables. First, I measured whether there was either an assault or an attempted assault, which I call an assaultive incident, compared to no assaultive behavior. And then I measured whether the assaultive incident was completed compared to attempted assault only. And because there were so few assaultive incidents, that second dependent variable was only examined with bivariate analyses. So if we look at the assaultive incidents in depth, we find that 40% were attempted but not completed. So for example, a person might have swung their fist at a staff member, but no one was actually hit. So staff assault can include what I called striking, which is what we normally think of when we think of assault: hitting, punching, kicking, stabbing. Stabbing was very rare, so it didn't have its own category. There's also grabbing, spitting, using other bodily fluids such as urine or feces, and throwing either an object or a liquid. So the most common assaultive behavior at this facility during this time was either spitting or trying to spit on staff, followed closely by striking or trying to strike staff. So here are the situational characteristics that I looked at. These were identified in prior research as possible contributors to staff assault. So I won't go into them all here. I'll just give some more explanation for a few. Time was measured in our 3 shifts. So first watch is the overnight shift. Second watch covers the morning and early afternoon. And third watch covers the later afternoon and the evening. I had 3 categories for locations: the segregation unit, an offender cell, and then all other locations were pretty rare in the sample, so they were combined. Medical incidents were times when offenders were either experiencing medical problems or receiving medical treatment. Threats of violence might have been either threats to a specific individual or maybe just threats of general violence. And verbal aggression included cursing, shouting, and making insults. So for all of these situational characteristics, I coded them so that I only measured things that happened before an assault. So if somebody had come out of the blue and punched a staff member, and then after that they had been tackled and handcuffed and taken to the segregation unit and they started screaming, that incident would have been coded no for physical force, restraints, movement within the facility, and verbal aggression, because none of those contributed to the assault. So then I also controlled for characteristics of offenders and staff, but I'm going to focus on the results regarding situational characteristics. So first, we know misconduct is generally more likely during unstructured leisure time. And consistent with that, assaults were most frequent during third watch, which is in the late afternoon and evening. So offenders aren't as likely to be engaged in structured activities as they would in the morning and the earlier afternoon when they're at work and in class and whatnot. And assaults were least likely during first watch when they're either asleep or at least not interacting with staff. In terms of location, when we look at descriptive statistics, there about half of the assaults occurred in segregation and about 29% were in the offender's cell. So just from that, we might have concluded that these are really dangerous places for staff. But when comparing assaults to non-assaults, I found that assaults were actually less likely to take place in those areas. And the attempted assaults in those areas were less likely to be completed. So I think this is likely because there's a physical separation between offenders and staff in these places, but it's also possible that staff may take certain precautions when responding in these areas. So I think it's important to explore that a little further so we can figure out how to transfer some of that protective aspect to other areas. Surprisingly, assaults were not more likely after offenders made verbal threats. And this could be because officers respond effectively to threats that are made, but I think it probably also shows that offenders make threats without much real motivation to be violent. They may just want to show a tough face to others, especially when there are other offenders around or other staff around. Rather than threats, verbal aggression, which included shouting, cursing, and making insults, was related to higher odds of assault. So these types of communication could be a better indicator of the offender's state of mind, and so they may be better flags that an assault will happen. So it's really important to consider how staff respond to verbal aggression, because in this part of an interaction, officers could be able to de-escalate the tension and prevent violence, or they could make things worse. And so training really needs to focus on those sorts of situations and how to de-escalate them. So one of the most important findings was that the use of physical force increased the likelihood of assault. When staff use physical force as well as chemical irritants and restraints, offenders may feel a need to retaliate. However, the assaults were more likely to be attempted only and not completed when physical force or restraints were used. So these measures seem to be complex in that they seem to protect staff, but they also seem to contribute to a motivation to assault staff in the first place. In contrast, incidents were less likely to result in assault when staff were verbally responding to misbehavior, such as by initiating a disciplinary process. So it's possible that a more communicative style, even a collaborative style, could be adopted, and that would be more effective in controlling behavior than these physical measures. So the study has been accepted for publication in the Prison Journal. I'm told that it's scheduled for December 2021. And in the meantime, the full report is available on our website. So thanks for watching, and please let me know if you have any questions.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Susan. Our next paper is, there we go, the sentence management of people serving life sentences in the Irish Prison Service. Anna, whenever you're ready, the floor is yours.
I'll just get my slides up. Okay, so my name is Anna Flynn, and I'm a PhD student with the University of Limerick and the Irish Prison Service. And today I'm going to talk about the sentence management of people serving life sentences in Ireland. And in particular, I'm going to discuss a new model of early multidisciplinary sentence management that was introduced in 2017. To give some background context, Ireland has 10 closed prisons and 2 open prisons. There are 3,500 to 4,000 people in custody in Ireland at any one time. There are 359 people serving life sentences, 350 men and 9 women, representing 9% of the total prison population. And the proportion of people serving life sentences in Ireland is quite high when compared to other countries. Across the United States and Europe, Ireland is the 5th highest proportion of people serving life sentences per 100,000 of national population. That's following the United States, United Kingdom, Greece, and Turkey. On average, 20 people are sentenced to life imprisonment each year. The majority are serving mandatory life sentences for murder, and the remainder are serving discretionary life sentences for sexual offences, manslaughter, and attempted murder. The average time served in prison prior to release is 19 years, and if released, people continue to serve their life sentence in the community. They must be supervised by the probation service and comply with the conditions of their release for the rest of their lives. People serving life sentences must serve a minimum term of 7 years before becoming eligible for review. Reviews are conducted every 1 to 3 years subsequently. People serving life sentences must engage meaningfully with services to address risk-related factors and to achieve rehabilitative goals. Therefore, early sentence management is essential to help people serving life sentences prepare for the review. However, various stakeholders in Ireland have highlighted the absence of sentence management in the early stage of a life sentence. They have noted that sentence management typically only began at the 7-year point of the sentence before the first parole board review. As one individual serving a life sentence said, "In the first 7 years, you have to wait. You don't do any work on your issues, your drug problem, or other problems. You're just left to get on with it. 6 years have gone by and nothing is done until 6 months before a review. You're left on your own survival for the first 7 years." And that was in a study by Richardson in 2012. It's important to note that early engagement may have been happening on an ad hoc basis at local level. However, there was no formal sentence management policy to ensure consistency throughout the Irish Prison Service estate. So in order to address these issues, the previous Director General of the Irish Prison Service commissioned a review of the sentence management, and this report was completed in 2017. The report emphasised the need to implement a new model of early multidisciplinary sentence management for people serving life sentences. The model was developed by the Irish Prison Service Psychology Service and the Probation Service, and it applies to people sentenced to life imprisonment after the 1st of April 2017. It is facilitated by the Psychology Service, the Probation Service, and prison officers designated as integrated sentence management coordinators. The model incorporates early multidisciplinary assessment and annual governor-led reviews in order to develop individual sentence plans. These sentence plans encourage active engagement with a range of services, including addiction, chaplaincy, education, and these services make up the prison-based multidisciplinary team. The model provides a clear pathway for people sentenced to life imprisonment after the 1st of April 2017. And now I'm going to just outline some of the key stages of the model. So after sentencing, an integrated sentence management coordinator meets the individual to complete a first contact assessment. The aim of this assessment is to identify the immediate needs and goals of the individual, and it covers several areas such as addiction, health, mental health, education, and work training. So following the assessment, the ISM coordinator then refers the individual to the services relevant to their needs and goals, and they assess the individual and contribute to their sentence plan. Within 6 months of sentencing, the individual attends a joint introductory meeting with a psychologist and a probation officer who explain the model, and if the individual consents to participate, the psychologist and probation officer will complete their respective assessments. Within 12 months of sentencing, the psychologist meets the individual to complete the Historical Clinical Risk Management 20, or HCR 20. The aim of this assessment is to manage the individual's risk of future violence. It contains 20 risk factors grouped into historical, clinical, and risk management factors. And these include problems with violence, antisocial behavior, substance use, major mental disorder, and personality disorder. These risk factors inform the development of risk management plans. Within 12 months of sentencing, a probation officer also meets the family of the individual to complete a social circumstances report. The aim of this report is to assess the individual's family and community environment. It explores a range of factors such as family background and history, significant relationships, lifestyle and behavior, the family's view of the offence, community's response to the individual and their offence, and the type of media coverage. The individual then attends an initial sentence planning meeting with the ISM coordinator, the psychologist, and the probation officer. The assessments are discussed and inform the individual's sentence plan. Within 12 months, the sentence plan is discussed at a governor-led review. This review is a roundtable meeting chaired by a governor and attended by the individual, the ISM coordinator, and a representative of each service. It provides an opportunity to discuss the individual's engagement, progress, and plans for the future. Following the meeting, the ISM coordinator meets the individual to finalize their sentence plan for the coming year. The individual attends a governor-led review annually to discuss their progress and to update their sentence plan. And the sentence plans and governor-led reviews guide the individual sentence management up to their first parole board review. And after this, the parole board also contributes to an individual's sentence management. As lead agency, psychology completes the risk assessment and report for the first and second parole board reviews. After the second parole board review, psychology hand over lead agency status to probation, who complete the risk assessment and report for the individual's subsequent parole board reviews. Psychology service continues to support the individual by providing annual appointments to assess their mental health and by accepting referrals for any emerging psychological needs. The individual continues to attend annual governor-led reviews with a focus on progressing from closed to more open conditions. And at this later stage, the parole board may make recommendations to prepare the individual for the transition from life in prison to life in the community. This may include periods of temporary release for educational or work purposes or transfer to an open centre. So as I mentioned previously, before the 1st of April 2017, services tended to only engage with people serving life sentences around the 7-year point before their first parole board review. In the new model, for those sentenced to life imprisonment after the 1st of April 2017, services start to engage with the individual within the first year of sentencing. So critical to the new model is early assessment, engagement, and sentence planning, rather than delaying sentence management until the 7-year point. And this is particularly important in the context of the new Parole Act 2019, because when this act is commenced, it will increase the number of years the individual must serve before they become eligible for a review. So the first parole board review won't take place until year 12. And given this 5-year increase, it's vital that sentence management is not delayed until year 12. And during this presentation, I have discussed the sentence management of people serving life sentences, but I think it's also important to acknowledge the serious nature of the offences committed by these individuals and the devastating impact of their actions on victims, families, and communities. So the model also promotes victim awareness and victim empathy. It encourages individuals to accept responsibility for the hurt, damage, and suffering they have caused. So the ultimate aims of the model are to achieve meaningful outcomes for people serving life sentences and crucially to promote safer custody and subsequently safer communities. So my role as a PhD student is to evaluate the model over a 3-year period, and I think this is an important mechanism of accountability. So my primary objectives are to explore the sentence management of people sentenced to life imprisonment, both before and after the implementation of the model, to identify the strengths, needs, and risks of people serving life sentences at different sentence stages, and to provide evidence-informed recommendations to the Irish Prison Service to support the successful implementation and further development of the model. I'll be doing this through interviews and also by collecting data from the files of people serving life sentences on the Prisoner Information Management System. So if you'd be interested to read more about the management of people serving life sentences in Ireland, I have an article in the Irish Probation Journal that has recently been published, and it's available on the Probation Service website. And I've just included my contact details there if you have any feedback or thoughts. So thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Anna. Our next presentation, Nothing But Walls and Concrete, Perceptions of Nature and Stress in Incarcerated Persons. Miyuki, Melissa, the floor is yours whenever you're ready.
Okay. Good morning. I am Miyuki Arimoto from Western Oregon University, and my co-presenter, Melissa Buis Michaux, is from Willamette University. Today, we will discuss how the exposure to nature affects the incarcerated persons using the data taken at the Oregon State Penitentiary. In 2019, the first Japanese-style healing garden was built at the Oregon State Penitentiary, which is the Oregon's max security prison. And this incarcerated-led project was accomplished as the realization of transformative justice principles. OSP leadership emphasizes normalization and humanization, and they point to the garden as an example of that. Incarcerated people were involved in this project in various levels, from raising private funds to building an extraordinary garden behind walls. Our research has 4 phases: pre-garden survey, focus group interviews, content analysis, and post-garden surveys. This presentation is based on the first phase, pre-garden survey. Our study is approved by the Oregon Department of Corrections. The pre-garden survey was conducted in June 2019. The Asian Pacific Family Club recruited incarcerated people on 2 scheduled dates. 510 people participated, which exceeded our goal of 500. Participants received cookies in response to the survey. Although we obtained 510 surveys, some have not answered most of the questions or skipped the demographic section. Therefore, we dropped those observations. The average age is about 44. The average age at first conviction is about 24. And the average category of sentenced term is between 15 and 25 years. Here's the race ethnicity distribution. In this sample, African American, Asian and Pacific Islander, and mixed race are overrepresented compared to the US population composition, which is what we would expect for prison. Regarding the level of stress, about 65% of respondents answered their lives were either stressful or very stressful. When we look at age and stress level, there was some variation across age groups. Incarcerated people in their 50s reported the most stress. When we look at the stress level by race and ethnicity, there is some variation. Native Americans and the mixed racial group report significantly higher levels of stress compared to other racial ethnic groups. This is something we could explore further in our focus group interviews. About 32% of valid responses are sentenced to over 25 years. Among those who received over 25 years of incarceration, 76% claim either stressful or very stressful. On the other hand, about 55% of those who sentenced up to 5 years felt either stressful or very stressful. This survey was conducted before COVID-19 pandemic. We can easily imagine that their stress level increased by now. Hereafter, Melissa takes over the rest of our presentation.
Thanks, Miyuki. In addition to the questions about stress level that Miyuki presented, we asked the adults in custody a handful of open-ended questions designed to understand their mental well-being and their attitudes about the idea of the garden. At the time we did our survey, the incarcerated men had heard a great deal about the garden planning, the vision, and the fundraising efforts. We asked, where do you go to think? And the overwhelming response was in the cell or bunk. OSP has a very traditional layout, 6 by 9 feet cells made out of concrete blocks stacked in tiers, more than half of which are. So the idea that a cell is a place of refuge for thinking is a bit surprising. Just over 6% said that there was nowhere to go to think. Since the garden was dubbed a healing garden, we asked the incarcerated men, what does healing mean to you? We received a wide variety of responses that included themes around accountability for past harms, forgiveness of others, and mending or repairing broken pieces of selves or relationships. And I've just included a few of those examples here. We asked, do you think the healing garden will be beneficial to you? And if so, how? I created a word cloud from the responses, and I'm not sure if this is the best way to capture what they wrote, but their responses did focus on the importance of place, and in particular, a new space to think, meditate, and connect to nature. As one respondent wrote, nature calms and soothes the mind. Interestingly, not everyone thought the garden would be beneficial to themselves. Some speculated that they would be denied access to the garden, or that they would be gone, moved, or released before the garden was finished. Respondents were more likely to say that the garden would benefit others, which is what this word cloud represents. In describing why it would benefit others, responses included, it would provide a place of quiet and calm that most people can't find. Some people need more than brick and bars. One major theme in the responses emphasized that the garden would be beneficial to others if incarcerated men are open to the experience. One colorful response in this vein was, quote, especially if they shut up and just take in the moment, end quote. Other responses stressed the opportunity for peaceful reflection or an escape. One respondent simply said, quote, we need a place to decompress. And we're happy to report that since our survey, the healing garden has been built. This picture is from the opening ceremony in February 2020. That is Department of Corrections Director Colette Peters cutting the ribbon with a representative from the Japanese government. The garden would not have happened without the vision work and dedication of these three men. On the left is Johnny Coffer, the adult in custody who first came up with the idea for the healing garden and who became its project manager. In the middle is Toshio Takanobu, the president of the Asian Pacific Family Club, also an incarcerated person. And on the right is Hoichi Kurusu, the world-renowned landscape architect who donated the plans for the garden and oversaw the garden's construction. And while we're hopeful the garden has a positive impact on adults in custody as a finished garden, anecdotally, the men who worked on the construction of the garden reported that it was a transformative experience to be able to participate in the building of something so beautiful. The garden was built over the summer and fall of 2019 and then opened to visitors in early 2020. And the result really is a spectacular place, one where you feel transported to another space. it doesn't feel like the rest of prison, and the men have been educated on the symbolic meaning of the various garden elements. This is a picture, I think this picture does a nice job showing the contrast between the garden and the yard and surrounding walls and barbed wire, which is directly across from the garden. And here Johnny is showing DOC Director Peters how to feed the koi fish. And then one final shot, just because this is a good one. We're looking forward to tracking the rest of the development of the garden on the adults in custody. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. Our final paper of this session, and hopefully a natural bridge, Finding Beauty in French Rural Prisons. Martine and Jerome, the floor is yours.
Yes, I'm going to share.
Afternoon.
Good afternoon. Our PowerPoint. Okay. Maybe I'm going to turn off the video and the camera because we had problems of connection with Martine. So maybe. Okay. Okay. So this slide is just to read and doesn't need any specific comments. We were asked by the French Ministry of Justice to conduct a study about the professional skills of prison officers, and we focused in particular on their values. This research could appear quite common, but three aspects are particularly interesting to note. Firstly, the study took place in a high security prison. Secondly, the prison is located in a former monastery, which dates back to the Middle Age. And that is why hereafter we will call it the Abbey. Thirdly, the prison is located in a rural environment. In fact, little is known internationally about French prisons, and even less when we focus on the rural and high security aspects together. Thus, it was very relevant to us to conduct this research and add knowledge about the function and the impact of rural environment on prison officers who could experience trauma, violence, and hard-working conditions in the specific context of high security prisons.
So we explored the literature, obviously, and three domains in particular were quite relevant to our research. The first one is general rural criminology, which is rooted in left realism. However, this literature focused mostly on the types of crimes that are committed in rural areas. And it also spends a lot of time debunking the myth, and legitimately so, of the difference between rural and urban areas. So this one was informative, but not directly useful. The second literature we explored was the one that pertained directly to prison officers, in general. It's a very sociological literature. A lot of it is devoted to designing different forms of typologies. However, in this literature, particularly the French one, we found mentioned the prison cutoff, the home prison cutoff, which was one of the themes that sprang up in our research. And the second thing was how rurality in itself could be used as a cutoff point, but it was just incidental in this particular literature. So none of them truly addressed our main issue. The third piece of literature which we explored was the literature on rural prisons per se. But again, this literature was essentially North American, and it focused, again, legitimately so in the context on tough on crime policies, on discrimination, and also on the impact, whether positive or negative or neutral, on the local economy, and with very classic NIMBY versus PIMBY community reactions. However, in our context, we were in a complete reverse scenario because we dealt with an ancient rural prison, which rather than be newly erected, was actually on the verge of being closed. And so it was more an issue of do not leave my backyard.
Concerning the methodology, we can sum it up in 4 main points. Firstly, the study was interview-based, and we literally downloaded the professional experience and culture of the prison officers. Secondly, we used a semi-structured interview grid validated by previous studies. Thirdly, during the long-lasting interviews, we used the appreciative inquiry approach, which consisted of asking the prison officers to tell us the best side of their job experience and the aspects of their work of which they are most proud. And finally, you can read on the current slide that our sample comprised 26 agents, and I let you a little time to check it. Now our findings. Here are our main findings about the use of rurality by the prison officers. I let you read them, and we are going to bring some details right now. You can see rural safety, rural cutoff, right distance, and the Abbey as a rural family. So first finding. The analysis of the interview's transcription showed that the rural environment provides the prison officers with feeling of safety in the prison and out of the prison. That is very important in a context in which almost all the prison officers in the Abbey experience trauma or art violence in their professional life. The prison officers have the feeling that the nature is able to appease the prisoners. They have the feeling that the prison is protected from attacks thanks to its remote localization. The prison officers have the feeling that they can leave their work wearing the uniform and be proud of that in the village, which would not be possible in a city or in a urban context. All these arguments are brought by the prison officers to prove that a rural environment is better to bring safety. Let's remind that we worked on the perceptions of the prison officers and not on the objective reality of a better safety.
Regarding the second theme, which is how to cut off from the prison activity during the day, which has been pointed out in the literature has been very difficult to perform. And we had a few interviews alluding to that. However, rurality came back full force all the time as something that really helped them perform this particular cutoff, with a lot of typically rural activities such as harvesting, fishing, wood cutting, but also sports activities that were done in wild and full nature. And some of the prison officers, we interviewed also had a countryside job. So it was literally cutting off to go and do another type of activity, professional activity. The second thing is, and Jerome alluded to this, is how the nature also helped them cope with trauma. They could do sports, they could meditate, and they could do all sorts of things that really helped them cut off.
Another finding is about the right distance. Sociology of prisons widely dealt with this important topic. It refers to the difficulty that prison officers encounter in their day-to-day work when they have to manage at the same time two paradoxical aspects of their job. That is to say, on the one hand, to enforce the order, and on the other hand, to be in a human relationship with the inmates. Each prison officer possesses personal tools to manage this role stress and this correct distance with the prisoners. But one tool appeared several times in the interviews, the rurality again. The rural activities are good topics of talks because they enable the prison officer to disclose things about themselves, which are part indeed of their everyday life, but without saying too much. In addition, the prisoners and the prison officers can refer to a topic they have in common.
So the third and last theme is the Abbey, as we called it, as a family, because a great number of the prison officers who worked there were related as family members. They were married, they had uncles, grandparents, parents, nephews, etc., who worked there. And this number increased if you included friends. In fact, the ones who were not related to them tended to move on to other jobs. So we called it the Abbey family. And this was a major theme as well. And it was woven into rurality as well, because you became part of the family if you participated in the rural activities, which we mentioned before. It was like an obligation and something that you were sort of ordained into. And if you accepted that, then you became a sort of a member of the large family in question. And so in conclusion, we did find that rurality was a very strong coping tool. And also perhaps you've all heard the term dirty work when it comes to working as a PO. The literature has mentioned that on a number of occasions. And we found that actually the wild nature surrounding the Abbey, which was so beautiful, had the capacity to cleanse, in essence, the dirty nature of, so to speak, of their job. However, one last more negative, perhaps, tone, the kinship in question was probably something that the Ministry of Justice, or why the Ministry of Justice decided to close the prison, because it was perceived as being a risk factor for not being vigilant enough. Remember, it was a high security prison, and you have to have people who are quite sharp and not too complacent. So thank you very much for listening to this. If you want to contact us, you can drop us an email at the addresses that are showing up now.
Thank you for listening.
Fantastic. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, all of our presenters. We've got a few minutes for questions. If anybody in attendance has anything you would like to ask any of our panelists today. Nothing has come in during the sessions, but I like to think people were just so captivated. So we'll wait a couple minutes to see if anything comes in. If anybody has anything to discuss. Oh yeah, Melissa, go ahead.
I was really curious about the French rural prison in part because it feels very different from what our experience is in the U.S. about rural prisons. Because they're so isolated, then the prisoners themselves can't access many resources or family, and so at least from the incarcerated perspective, it's like they do not want to be sent to the rural prison in Oregon. And OSP, the penitentiary that Miyuki and I were talking about, is set in the capital of Salem and has a lot of community resources. And because of those resources, many of the correctional staff also prefer to be at OSP. So I was curious about that difference. And is that true across other rural prisons, or was it unique to that place?
I think it's quite unique to that place. It was a very, very unique place, to be honest, because it's very isolated as well. So, I mean, the prisoners do encounter the same difficulties. You're talking about the access, the access for families, activities, etc., etc. But there are so many positive factors that compensate for this, that actually the prisoners didn't want the prison to close either. They wanted to keep it backyard as well. And it was sent away, and it was so traumatic for everyone, for the prison officers, for everybody around, the locals, and for the prisoners. The decision was so politicized and contentious. It was terrible. To this day, am I right, Jerome? We still don't understand why it was closed, apart from the thing I mentioned at the very last minute. There's local politics involved, like in the States as well, when you build a prison, but you can also have political aspects when you decide to destroy the prison in question. It was clearly the case there. But nature played a massive part. Jerome has been there more frequently than I have been. And within the prison itself, you've got grass and things. You can see animals. They can see deer from the window. It's a bit magic, really. And it's a monastery. So that's another thing. You were talking in your research about finding time to think. It's not the only French prison that has been built in a monastery. And this is usually valued by prisoners because it gives them time to think, as you're supposed to do in a monastery. It really works. Yeah. It's silent. The walls are thick. That helps a lot with the noise that you get in prison normally is sort of limited. So yeah, it's a fascinating place. It's so sad that it's closing.
I had a question for Miyuki and Melissa, and I apologize if you addressed this and I missed it doing all of the back end stuff that I'm doing, moderating everything. So has the success of the prison garden inspired the DOC to spread that project to other institutions?
They're talking about doing a similar garden in 2 other prisons. Of course, COVID happened right after this, and I'm glad the men inside OSP have the garden now, since they haven't had any visitors or any volunteer staffing since March. So that's a huge stressor. And in fact, we had terrible wildfires, and there was 2 other prisons were evacuated into this prison. So I'm glad that they've had the garden for those reasons, but that really has just kind of curtailed, I think, activity for other gardens and other prisons. And I would say that this garden was a huge endeavor. They had to raise all private funding for this. The state didn't pay for any of it. And so there were a lot of foundations that contributed to it. It's a pretty extraordinary garden. So I think there's hope for more garden prisons. And Kirisu also said it is now his desire to build a healing garden in a prison in every state in the United States. So I don't know if Miyuki, if you wanted to add anything.
Very ambitious. I wish him well.
Yeah. Hoichi Kurisu and his company, they really put all in effort on this, and he felt very compelled and inspired by the pictures of gardens and Japanese internment camps during World War II, and he felt like this was a kind of full cycle giving back to be able to help create gardens in prisons.
Wow, it's really amazing. Thank you. So not seeing any other questions, and with only a couple minutes left, I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up today and remind everybody that this stream was sponsored today and sponsored throughout the day by Southern Illinois University Press. Thank you again to all of our panelists for your amazing work. I wish you well in the future of all your research. Thank you to everybody in attendance today. If you plan on sticking around this stream, I have to shut the webinar down for recording purposes. It will restart in about 10 minutes. Thanks again, everybody. Thank you for coming out for CrimCon. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Yes, thank
you.
you.